From the city of brotherly love, this is Shark Bite Biz with David Strausser.
Oops, you did it again. You just arrived to the newest episode of Shark Bite Biz. Today's episode, it's all about the mind. This week, I've got to do some housekeeping. This week, okay, Wednesday, September 21st at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Please remember to tune in live to YouTube to watch the second episode of Shark Bite Biz live with our fabulous and amazing co-host, Odetta Pine. We'll be talking about the CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, I believe, and of course, the ongoing Elon Musk and Twitter saga. Remember, if you love this show and you love our live stream, support us by grabbing some of the freshest coffee known on earth from deadhousecoffee.com, where you can save 20% just by using the code SHARK. Now let's get back to today's episode, because it is a fabulous discussion about the brain and how the brain works. The neuroscience of your brain, creativity, and writing. I had no idea what I was getting into when I originally booked this guest. I'm like, seems interesting. You know, I like to learn about how the mind works. I like to learn about creativity, writing, reading, stuff like that. But I tell you what, I've had plenty of fascinating discussions on this show. This one takes a cake. It is probably the most fascinating discussion I have had on this show. And ultimately, my mind was blown away because I became totally engulfed in this most intriguing of intriguing discussions. So, who do we have today? None other than Mr. Rob Ashton from all the way over in the UK. Rob Ashton is an author, entrepreneur, and former scientist who has had a lifelong fascination with how the things we read and write influence what we think and do. He's been researching the science behind the process of reading and writing for more than 6 years. His research runs the gamut of cognitive and social neuroscience, cognitive and social psychology, and behavioral and neuroeconomics. This has given him a unique perspective on why so much of our written communication simply doesn't work. Rob is also a successful entrepreneur, having founded the global learning company Emphasis in 1998. The company has so far enabled over 70,000 people to make more impact with their professional writing. High-profile clients include all the big four accounting firms, big tech, big pharma, the UK Prime Minister's office at 10 Downing Street, and even the royal household at Buckingham Palace itself. And I just got to say, we recorded this episode, obviously, before the Queen has passed. So, Rob, I know working with Buckingham Palace, you have a certain love and passion for the monarchy out there. So, hey, love to you, love to your country as you go through this transition period with the loss of your queen. So anyways, I'm going to shut up. Let's bring Rob right on in here.
Creative and innovation tips.
Rob, welcome to Shark Bite Biz. You, my friend, you just became Shark Bait.
Hey, David, thanks for having me on the show. Is that a good thing? Just became Shark Bait?
It's a pretty good thing. Great to have you here. And, we have a tradition on the show. Very first question we always ask every single person that comes on. What's your experience? What's your background? How'd you get where you're at? You know, basically in a nutshell, what makes Rob Rob?
I think if you cut me in half, you'd find the word writing running all the way through me like a stick of rock candy. It's so I'm all about writing. I'm a writer. It's a bit meta. I'm a writer who focuses on writing, or specifically the science of writing, the brain science of written communication. I did start off as a scientist many years ago. Worked as a molecular biologist on the first tests for HIV, but moved from there into science publishing and then set up a training business focusing on written communication.
So I did notice that it said former scientist in your bio. And I was like, wow, I don't think I've ever seen someone call themselves a former scientist. Most people just stick with it. I'm a scientist. They don't add the word former in there, even if they're not active in practicing. So I found that to be kind of unique.
I thought it would be a bit disingenuous of me to call myself a scientist now, because it's been a long time since I left the bench, as scientists say. Very long time ago. I'm more of I've been an entrepreneur for the last 24 years, running a training company specializing in writing skills. But now I'm a writer. I do this full time. And I focus on the science of written communication.
The science of written communication. That is a crazy journey, though. I mean, going from working on the first HIV test all the way through now, being a former scientist, as you call it, and now working on writing and the science of writing. What do you view as the science of writing or written communication?
Do you know, when I started this, so having been if you go back just quickly to when I left practical science, and first of all I started off in science journals and then moved into consumer publishing. So I was a journalist, I was an editor, and I learned things that I learned how to make words work. I learned how to give them much more impact. And then when I set up Emphasis, the writing consultancy, that was to teach people some of those trade secrets from publishing. So we were and still are, that company's still very much alive and kicking, teaching people how to communicate in writing, how to make things much more effective. But the science bit never really left me, and I knew that what we were doing worked, but I didn't know why it worked, and I didn't know if we could make it better. But what I also noticed is that there's an awful lot of pseudoscience out there. If you look on the web, there's a lot of bad advice. There's a lot of stuff that seems to be based on hearsay or even wishful thinking.
Are you talking about ancient aliens on History Channel? Is that pseudoscience?
No. So it's when people talk about how the brain works, for instance.
Right.
They might talk about, say, left brain or right brain bias. They might say, "Are you a left brain person or a right brain person?" And how to write for the left side of the brain, how to write for the right side of the brain. This idea that the left is very logical and the right side of the brain is creative. That's probably one of the biggest brain myths out there, because it's not true. We don't have this left brain, right brain bias. And in fact, if you look at writing, the area of the brain that's responsible for language including written communication is which you think of as being often quite a creative thing, right? That's in the left side of the brain for most people. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where people say, how to write for right brain people, that kind of thing.
For most people, okay. Can it be on the other side for the rest of the people?
Yeah, I think it's I'm unsure the percentage just off the top of my head, but I think it's about 5%, something like that, 5 maybe 10%, maybe a bit more. But yeah, so it's and incidentally, it can change as well. If you have brain surgery early enough in life, so children who have brain surgery and have half their brain removed, and let's say the left side of their brain is removed, you find that they usually then acquire the language capacity. It sort of takes up residence in the right side of the brain. So it's not even something that's set in stone from the beginning. Although it is for most people. But yeah, and with brain science generally, you're often talking about generalities anyway.
That's crazy. I mean, I guess I never realized, as you were explaining that the brain sounds like it can develop differently for every person. Is that an accurate or semi-accurate statement?
Well, within certain limits.
And how do they know that? I mean, that seems like that's pretty crazy to figure that out, generally speaking, as well too. I mean, how do you pin down like, oh, this part of the brain does this? I mean,
neuroscience is something that's been really coming on in leaps and bounds over the last 20 years. Probably one of the biggest developments was the invention of a brain scanner that can show what's happening in real time. Now, when I say can show what's happening, it shows where the blood is flowing. So you can, and neuroscientists use blood flow as a kind of a proxy for activity. Okay, so it's so they will they'll put somebody in one of these scanners called an fMRI. You've probably heard of it, functional magnetic resonance imaging. Put people in these scanners, give them some tasks to do, and then see which areas light up. And lighting up is showing where the blood flow is. And then what you can then do is do that for a number of people and see where the activity is. And that, there are lots of other brain imaging techniques.
I don't know. To me, it just sounds pretty astonishing that it would be as simple as seeing where the blood flows to a certain area of the brain. And that's how you know, oh, okay, he's doing this. So 1 + 1 = 2. That must mean that he's using that section of the brain. I don't know. It just sounds a little bit too simple for something as complex as the human brain.
And it is, because scientists don't use just that. So they will, so there are lots of other brain scanning techniques that, fMRI is kind of it enables you to see what's happening in real time, but it's not that detailed. Whereas there are other brain scanning techniques which are. But what you have to remember is also they're not basing this just on that. So in the case of language, for instance, the very first parts of the brain to be identified as being associated with a certain activity were the language areas of the brain. Two areas called Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which deal with speech production and language comprehension. With that, there was in the early days, it was actually about brain injury. That's how brain scientists learn about classic brain science is you study people who can't do something, and then in an autopsy or in the case of Broca's area, it was a guy who, it's a very, very famous story of a guy who worked on the railroad and had an accident. So he was tamping down some gunpowder in a rock with an iron rod, and he forgot to put the wadding in. It would stop it sparking, and it sparked. And this rod shot through his head. It shot through his eye, and at the top of his head. Apologies to anybody eating a dinner at the moment. And he, his personality changed. So people can then see, when things like that happen, they can say, oh, okay, so it looks like, he recovered to all intents and purposes in that he didn't die, but he was changed in his abilities. And that's, so it's things like that where people have these brain injuries, have brain tumors, neuroscientists can kind of correlate what they're having a problem with.
Yeah, I've heard stories of that throughout life of people, they got brain injury and, to all intents and purposes, like you said, they fully recovered, but they recovered almost as a different person, where it's like their personality is different. Maybe their abilities are different. And sometimes I think I've even seen some people on, TV shows after traumatic, brain injury thing like that, where, like one of those unsolved mystery type things where, this happened to this person and now they can do this super ability. Like, what is it? How come the mind works like this? And it's kind of fascinating to have somebody that is as studied as you are come in, and to a degree, not saying with the specific people that I saw on TV, but you're kind of validating that those stories, they kind of are real. Depending on the story, depending on the person, obviously, but it does actually happen. The essence of what we're talking about can and does happen.
Totally. There's a famous case in the 60s of a mild-mannered family guy. He was an Eagle Scout. He was doing really well in his job. Nothing really out of the ordinary. And unfortunately, it was terrible. Tragically, he killed his mother. He killed his wife, and then the next day he went on a killing spree. and he'd even written a letter. He'd written it in his diary, just saying, can you, talking about this ideation of these things he wanted to do, and obviously they found this afterwards. And he said, in the event of my death, can you do an autopsy on me, examine my brain? And what they found was a tumor growing in the middle of his brain, just pressing on the amygdala, and the amygdala is kind of like the emotional center of the brain. So this changes personality. And I know, and quite dramatically, but I knew somebody back when I worked in magazines. There was a guy whose personality changed the other way. It was actually, he was somebody who was quite difficult to work with and quite, he could be really, I wouldn't say he was universally liked, put it that way. It was kind of seemed to be quite selfish, quite arrogant, and he got a brain tumor, and he became the loveliest guy you could ever meet. It was terminal, but everybody was so sad when he finally passed away, and they just said he was such a nice guy, and you could just see this change in his personality, and it was it was the tumor that was doing it. So yeah, absolutely.
How much of it though was the tumor versus the psychology of it though? I wonder, with somebody like that, they find out that they have a tumor and they're like, guess, I'm going to die. And it just humbles you and changes the way that you think, just, your own self-conscious versus the tumor, and how much of it is the tumor. Because I can tell you what, if I found out I had a tumor in the brain, even if it has zero personality impact on me at that point, it's going to change me as an individual. Just the mentality, the mind, F that would give me. People get what I'm trying to say there, like just that impact alone. And before the tumor even has a chance to impact my mind. So could there have been some of that going on as well too? Is it a little of both? What do you think?
Well, we'll never know. And this wasn't a scientific study, so there would have, there was no autopsy. I think that's probably that's fair. That's fair to say. That was probably a huge factor. Finding out they had a terminal illness. It was something that a lot of people commented on. That doesn't make it true. And it's, you're absolutely right. It's anecdotal evidence.
I want to make sure my funeral is not empty. I mean, I think that's the mentality a lot of people would take, if they found out what he found out. Then it's probably a mix of both. But with the first person that you explained, the quote unquote Eagle Scout, up until the brain injury, I mean, that kind of sounds to me like the people out here that we find that have CTE, for people that don't know, do you know what CTE is? Okay. So people that get chronic head injuries, concussions, stuff like that, basically over time, I guess it scars the brain or something like that. It's part of the reason why American football is so so dangerous, boxing, stuff like that, and why some of the football players over past history, American football, again, for people listening overseas, but not football as in what Americans call soccer, but with, the NFL, with, our famous Philadelphia Eagles. But these head injuries would call over time getting hit and hit and hit in the head. That's why they take concussions so seriously now in the NFL. I mean, if you see a player get a hit to the head, I mean, it's penalty, you can be ejected for it. They also take the player that was hit, out of the game as a precaution, at least until they've been examined. But if they're stumbling, stuff like that. Whereas, 10 years ago, it'd be like, okay, you're up now, get back in the huddle, go do your job. They take a totally another approach to it because so many players have gone off the deep end. And it's not just something that happens in football. I mean, you have, people from different sports. I believe I don't want to say the name, but there is a wrestler that went out and committed a tragedy. I believe they determined that he was potentially with CTE, and there's no way to kind of diagnose it right now. You can only diagnose it through an autopsy, as far as they know. That like they can detect like, hey, these people, off themselves, or their families, or did a violent act, or have been acting outrageous, and it led to their demise and death, whatever it may be, just outlandish behavior. And then they study the brains afterwards, and they found out that it's due to this thing called CTE. So that's something you should see it as you're kind of like an expert with a lot of these different things. You should check that out. I think you'll find that topic very, very interesting.
I definitely will. Yeah, and that sounds familiar. You see the same thing in boxing, which you'd expect to.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's boxers, even professional wrestlers, and wrestling is fake, but those guys get hit hard. I mean, even though I guess a lot of wrestling fans are going to be mad I just called wrestling fake, but even though things like the WWE is not real, those guys are taking a beating. They're putting their bodies through torture to perform a show, and they still do get hits, jerks, things like that to the head. And it does produce things like CTE, which is ultimately why I think I think that's one of the main reasons that they've toned down, like the WWE has toned down wrestling to what it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, probably when it was at the height of its popularity. And then, you've had some crazy incidents happening there. CTE starts getting recognized and renowned by a scientist. Like, hey, this is it's happening in all the sports world, boxing to football to wrestling to all these different things. And I think that's kind of what toned it down to make it more family friendly. Which is what I hear from a lot of old school wrestling fans are not fans of today.
You mentioned soccer. That's even with that. Heading the ball,
the hit in the head of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a solid, not solid, but you've got a leather ball, and I think about the what the balls were like. Thinking back to my dad, when he was playing football, as we call it, as a kid. This thing was like a rock. And they would just head it, and the first time I ever headed a leather ball, it was like, it's kind of saw stars, So yeah. But I mean, I think the thing is with the brain, it's I should stress, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm somebody who looks at all sorts of brain science, but that includes psychology.
Your neurology, the neurology is a big part of what you do, because it helps with like you studying that stuff. You're not a neurologist, but you're very well studied, it sounds like, in that area, because it helps with the written communication.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's I've got a strong science background, but what I started doing 6 years ago,
never would have guessed.
What gave it away? What gave it away? But 6 years ago, I thought, I will look into the psychology of writing. I will look into the neuroscience. I'll look into the behavioral economics, how we make decisions. And I gave myself 6 months to do that. I thought I'll just take some time out. I'll work on this for 6 months, see what's there, and then write a book on it. And here I am 6 years later, and it took me
6 months to 6 years.
That background helped, as you rightly say, it helped me read the stuff. It helped me get into the papers, the published papers on it, and bring myself up to speed. But I could be doing this for the rest of my life. There's so much science out there on this, and it's and outside of academia, most people don't know about it. And in fact, what they do is this thing writing, which actually they're doing all day. Let's be clear about this. What are we talking about? We're talking about the thing you do all day. We're talking about text messaging, messaging people on Slack. We're talking about email.
That's one thing I think people forget, that writing is like, for example, okay, let me flip it on the other side real quick. We're reading, okay? reading and writing. I just had the kids just started school yesterday. My 5-year-old just went to kindergarten, and I had to fill out papers for my newly minted fourth grader. And the teacher was asking, does the student read? What does the student feel about reading? And I kind of sat back and I'm like, no, she does not read physical books, but she is reading all the time, whether it's chatting with friends in video games, whether it's writing text messages or reading text messages, whether it's reading this or reading that. Like, she is reading digital products 24/7. So I had to specify, like, she reads digital books, hardcover paperback book. Probably not so much. And it's just because we're a very digital first family here. But she, reads a lot and, understands between formal words, and also reading slang words and stuff like that. So I don't know. I kind of view that, just as you were saying with writing, okay, where you're writing, like, writing is more than just, oh, you're writing out a letter or something, handwritten notes, stuff like that. It's digital text messages, it's writing digital notes, it's writing on the computer, it's writing on Facebook. It takes many different forms. I think too many people kind of box in writing or reading more in the traditional forms. And especially now in the digital transformation period that we're in, they need to expand those definitions, I think, of both topics. I mean, do you think I've got a point there at all? What do you think about that?
I totally got a point. It's that the thing is that we write and we read more now than at any other point in our history.
Right. And that's what people don't understand. I argue this with my wife all the time. My wife's like, oh, your daughter's never sorry, Fed just turned up. My wife's like, oh, she never read. I'm like, she's reading all day, all the time, like all this digital interaction that she's having. She's reading. And that's something 10 years ago. Like, I have a 19-year-old too. There wasn't this much digital stuff. He didn't have a cell phone when, it wasn't common for 10-year-olds to have cell phones when he was 10, like it is now. He's not reading, wasn't reading 24/7 unless he had a physical book. The world has changed, and she is reading all day, every day, because everything she has to do involves reading or writing, searching things on Google. The 4-year-old, well, I guess he's 5 now. He's smart. He can voice search, but you can only look at images to tell if it's right or not. Whereas my daughter, actually type it out, or maybe she might do a voice search, but then she's reading the results and, not just guessing by looking at images of thumbnails and stuff, which one's right, to pick out the right video. They are reading and writing 10 million times more than what kids were 10 years ago. And I think people need to understand they are.
And we all are. We've become, outside of our immediate, not our immediate circle, but outside of the people we spend the day with, and sometimes including those people, we've become a writing first, a reading first society. If I want to contact customer services, I will use live chat. It's not chat, it's writing. We call it chat, but it's not, and that's and that's why, incidentally, it often goes wrong because we think it's speaking when it's not. I've going back in the early, I can remember the early days of email in offices, and I remember sitting in a small office, and there were just 3 people in this office, and my boss came in one day in a really terrible mood. He'd had I didn't know what was wrong. I had no idea, but he was really grumpy and really rude with myself and my other colleague. And about half an hour later, he sent us both an email apologizing. And this guy sat 6 feet away from me, and that was more than 20 years ago, so even back then, he felt it, that did not make things better. Incidentally, I was just thinking, why didn't you just tell us, we're here? But that's what we do now. We sometimes we hide behind it, but sometimes I don't think it's our fault. We're just drawn in by our devices.
There's a lot of keyboard warriors.
Oh yeah, we get that too. You get that too, absolutely.
Oh, I think the keyboard warriors go both ways. I mean, apologize via email, not because you're trying to troll or be a keyboard warrior, but there's the reverse psychology to that of what keyboard warrior typically means as well too, and it's for people that are ashamed of their actions, but they have too much pride or ego or whatever it may be to not actually apologize themselves by picking up the phone or walking over to your desk at 6 feet away and apologize. So therefore, they send it via email. I view that being a keyboard warrior too. It's just the opposite side, just kind of like what we were talking, not too long ago about the person that got the brain tumor and went from Eagle Scout to a really bad guy because of the tumor. I mean, I kind of view that.
I think there's something else.
Everything balances out.
It does, but I think there's something else going on. I think that it's, yes, some people hide behind it, but I also think that we think on screen. So whether that screen is our phone, or whether that screen is is on our desktop or is our laptop, on our laptop, we see that, or that becomes an extension of our brain. Okay, so we're thinking in that brain extension. Okay, and then and so it becomes the most natural thing in the world then to apologize or to continue the discussion online. I mean, if people stay in arguments by text message for hours sometimes, when they could, if they just move that.
I'm just as guilty too.
But if they move their phone up to there, they could probably solve it in 5 minutes, and but we don't, we stay stuck.
Or continue the conversation. I mean, that's something, that's a point there that you said that I think is golden too. And I think a lot of people are guilty of this and they don't realize it. I'm very guilty of this. But I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm conditioned with the biz dev background, and it's kind of like, hey, I just had a meeting with somebody and I'm used to sending out a communication that kind of just reaffirms the the discussion that we just had, like, hey, we just talked about this and this kind of what we agreed to. And I don't know. I just condition myself so much in doing that I'll admit to it that I'm like this. And I think a lot of people are, to where that, well, the thing is that then I finish up a good phone call, whatever it may be, with friends or whatever. And it's like, okay, I text them right away, because I'm keeping the conversation going and reiterating what we may have just spoken about for an hour and beat the topic to death. And I'm guilty of that too, because it just, I don't know, like it just kind of engulfs because it just transfers the conversation, I
don't think that's guilty. I don't think you're guilty of anything there. I think, don't get me wrong, writing is a miracle of adaptation. Writing is amazing. You see dots and squiggles on a screen and you hear a voice in your head. That is, that's as miraculous as it gets. But what we do is we underestimate just how complex that is. We take it for granted. So you mentioned you've got a child just starting school. You think about what kindergarten. You think about what happens as we're children. We learn to speak and listen. We learn spoken language just by osmosis, just by hearing the voices of the people around us. So we are, as our brain.
My 5-year-old is actually bilingual, fluent in Spanish and English,
and it's amazing. But there you go. But they will even absorb an awful lot of the rules of grammar. They won't know what they're called, but they will actually work out the grammar. So, for instance, they'll work out that often in English that you put a D on the end or a D sound on the end of a word to form the past tense. You might say, they might say talk and they go to talked. But then the reason that is because of the mistakes they make. So they might say thinked. instead of thoughts, or they might say seed instead of sword, but that
more happier.
Yeah, but from that,
Daddy, I'm so more happier now. I'm like, no, or things like that. I hear those types of things. To your point, like that means that he's understanding it. I think all three of our kids have been a little bit slower with talking, the talking, grammar and stuff like that up until the kindergarten-ish letter. But since like my 5-year-old, I mean, he just turned 5 August 10th. Okay. So he's a newly minted 5-year-old, but he is been speaking bilingual for over 2.5 years. I mean, his first words were probably in Spanish. His second words were probably in English. And since then, it slowed down his development. If he was speaking one language, okay, he would probably be a little bit further along. But I think he's almost at a normal 5-year-old speaking ability level right now. But if you go back that whole time, he was speaking, he was learning 2 different languages, and he also identified which languages are which, separated the languages, and who to speak to. All 3 of the kids did that before they were 5 years old. I mean, you're talking what? When the kids start taking like really kind of babbling and speaking, like maybe 2-ish, right? I think it feels like it's been forever. Around that time, whatever it is, everybody's a little different. 1.5, 2, somewhere in there. They really start babbling. Since then, he's been able to, every now and like it starts out a little bit of what we call Spanglish, mixing English and Spanish together. Starts out a little bit like that, but then as they start getting to 2, 2.5, 3, they're totally going different paths. So while it might not be perfect Spanish, while it might not be perfect English, both are separate. Like he knows, mommy, I'm speaking just in Spanish, and okay, daddy, I'm speaking just in English, and he's separating that. And it's funny because sometimes he'll get emotional. He'll tell his mom the whole story in Spanish, and I'll come in. I'll be like, okay, this is, what are you saying? And I might even say it in Spanish, and he repeats the whole story just as emotional, giving us a very emotional reenactment. But he does it all in English then too. And that's where it's like, holy cow! And this kid was, 3, 4 years old, like that. That to me is mind blowing.
Now, I think it's a wonderful story, and what I think that illustrates beautifully is the fact that we evolved to do this. Okay, we evolved to speak and listen. We've been using sounds to communicate literally since we crawled out of the swamp. They found fossils of fish with vocal apparatus in them. Okay, so it's this is something that we are hardwired to do now, or rather, we're programmed to learn to speak and to listen, and from that to learn to speak. Now you contrast that with writing. No amount of reading something you don't understand will teach you to read. So if something is saying an alphabet that you don't understand, maybe it's Russian, maybe it's Hebrew, maybe it's Chinese. If you don't know what those things are, no amount of just looking at them will make you read. You won't absorb. You won't learn reading by osmosis. You have to be taught. And so this is why I call reading a miracle of adaptation, because it's something that we have devised, and we have to learn to do it. That's why it takes so long to learn to read. What's actually happening when you're learning to read is you're rewiring your brain, and you're joining together parts of the brain that you evolved for other things. So you've obviously got you've got the visual cortex, but you've also got you've got your hearing. So you hear words. As I said, you hear sounds in your head when you look at these dots and squiggles, and you can tell this. Sometimes I'll make a mistake when I'm writing, and I'll write down a word that sounds similar. Now I'm not just saying words that sound exactly the same but are spelt differently. So, two with 2 O's or with a W, but, words like, confusing bring and ring or something like that when I'm writing. And that says to me, I'm hearing the words. So we join these things together. It takes a long time. We've not evolved to do that because humans haven't been writing long enough to have evolved to have done that. The earliest writing only about 5,000 years ago. It's something we have to do it, and it remains. And this is, I think, is key.
How long have humans lived again? I forget. Just for comparison.
So you put me on the spot. Millions of years. Okay, so I mean, if you think of a major structure in the brain, okay, so something like, say, the visual cortex, that can take a million years for the brain to evolve, to make major changes through evolution.
I just I threw it in Bing because I had Bing open here, but yeah, I binged about 6 million years ago. Humans have evolved according to what they say, which is crazy to think that 6 million years ago we've existed, and only the 5,000 years we've had writing. I mean, maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe it goes back 10 or 15,000 years, and there's stuff that we just don't know from a.
Yeah, the earliest examples that we've found. So writing evolved in
I mean, what did you count some of those cave paintings and stuff like that as a form of writing or not?
But certainly a form of communication. But what we're talking about here is symbols. So using symbols to represent language.
Would hieroglyphics represent language or symbols?
Yeah. So hieroglyphics would. So language. So written language evolved in, I think, 4 areas independently. The earliest examples were Sumerian. So that's, it's in modern day Iraq. And
a little mystery about the Sumerian out there as well too, because I think this goes back to like I made a joke about the ancient alien type stuff, that they have drugs that look alien-ish of gods or people, and from what I understand, there's a lot of mystery surrounding them as a culture, and that's why, I mean, if you remember Iraq, what happened out there with some of the looting of the museums and the destruction of these very old ancient documents, that had my heart torn, because it's like, you're never going to get that stuff back. And there may be answers to human evolution somewhere in some of this old data that teaches us something. Sorry, a little off topic there, but I had to mention it because I thought, I mean, that's something that really bummed me out once I heard that you brought up the word Sumerians, and out there in Iraq, seeing that, and that because there's a lot of things. I mean, Iraq doesn't have pyramids like they do down in Egypt, but they also have a lot of different, just as many oddities for the times that the Sumerians lived. And it's like, how the heck did they build these? Like, what are they? Are they like the bulls or the horses or something like that out there, I believe, from ancient Sumeria? And they're like 25 feet high. And people are like, how'd they build this so beautifully out of stone? It's incredible. You should check that out sometime. But one yeah, that's what a lot of people say. A lot of people say it is. And it's really interesting that I have a guest like you, because one of they have courses on Audible, and it's crazy because I just brought up this book a few weeks ago to another guest on the show, and we were talking about it for a moment. Which is rare because I usually don't bring up about this book, but it was the history of language and explaining how we got to our modern day languages, talking all the way back to the ancient languages, and how tribes in Africa, for example, they'll do like the different clicks and stuff like that with their languages, or how people pronounce the ending of the words differently, and then just kind of how it spreads and how it grows, and some of the mysteries about, hey, how come these people speak this language right here in this island, but the other civilizations, like in that time period, was 3,000 miles away or something like that. They bring up some of these crazy things like that too, but it was about the whole evolution of language. And it was an amazing course because this isn't like one of those pseudoscience type books or anything. This was actually a real college professor. Wharton, I believe, is his last name. Wharton. And he's a real professor. And these are all of his lectures, and it's about 36 hours worth of lectures from a whole semester at his college. And it was amazing hearing the stories, all this stuff put together. So having somebody like you telling me how that stuff kind of works in the brain, I don't know. I feel like I'm just completing a puzzle here. Like I just got the other half to the puzzle that I didn't know because he didn't get into the neuroscience part of how language or writing or reading or talking or speaking, how that works into the brain. So to me, it's kind of like you completed the puzzle and now I got an idea. I do have one burning question for you, though, that has sat on my mind throughout this whole interview. And that is, you've named different areas of the brain that are for like reading, writing, stuff like that. I think you said for writing, it was 2 parts. Is that accurate?
For language, yeah. But I mean, it's not that those. I mean, you need to be a bit careful when kind of ascribing areas, and saying this is the language center, this is that. That's where there's a lot of activity. It's there's a lot of things going on. Yeah, it's all kind of like it's like
my core question though would be this, okay? With those, let's just say we suspect that this is the language center, okay? Now, people, they may have a brain injury, okay? I think you said it was on the left side. So let's just say they get a brain injury, it happens on the left side. So then it reforms on the right side.
Yeah, if you have, so the example I gave was in brain surgery. So it was, I was thinking of, there've been people who've had surgery for severe epilepsy,
right.
And they've had the left side of their brain removed. Okay, but these are kids. These are children under I think they're younger than 5. And if the same things happens later on, I don't believe you do get that. It's so it has to happen at a time when the brain is in development. Yeah, the one of the surprising things about kids is they have many more nerve cells, many more neurons in their brain than adults do. You'd think it would be the other way around, right? But we're actually born with this kind of this overabundance of neurons. And then what happens as we learn is it's a bit like kind of chipping away at a rock to reveal a beautiful sculpture. What happens is our environment, our learning. This is why, for instance, it's so important that our parents talk to us when we're young. These things send signals to say which bits to chip away and which bits to leave, and then you're left with this structure. But that's all. There's so much happening in children, and it's surprising that it's a process of taking away, not adding.
With that, then, are the names, like the areas of the brain that you named, like, hey, we think this is the language center, like in a child like that, then if the language, like, are the names of the brain fixed then? So like, say there was a child that had that seizure disorder, had the surgery, and the language center of their brain then changes to a different part of the brain, or we suspect that it's in that part of the brain, well, especially because the other half isn't there. So if that's the new language center, does it just migrate to a different name, or does it have the same name then? That's what I was trying to work out. Do you get the question?
When you're talking about naming parts of the brain, the names are, most of them are very old. So the brain was named before we knew what those areas were associated with. So we'll talk about the prefrontal cortex. We'll talk about the hippocampus. The hippocampus, which is associated with memory, was named because it's shaped like a seahorse. So the French for seahorse is hippocampe. So it's kind of these are anatomical names. And so what you're really saying there is that function has moved from this bit of the brain, which we have a name for, to that bit of the brain, which we have a name for. But the naming really is something that's I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying this. It's historical. It's something, it's the early brain anatomists. They would name these parts of the brain before really they knew what they did. And neuroscience is still a young science. It's often overstated. That neuroscientists have said, you can do that. If you do this, this happens, and often a lot of those statements are too they're too cut and dried. They're too emphatic, and it's and neuroscientists are changing their minds as well as they discover more. They update their theories and their opinions, and that's how science works.
That's amazing, and that's how, well, at least that's how it's supposed to work, right? I do want to correct myself. The book I was talking about earlier was actually The Story of Human Languages, and it was kind of the courses of what I was speaking. It's called The Great Courses. It's a part of their series, The Great Courses, and there's a lot. But the author is actually John McWhorter, WHORTER, for people that are out there listening. And I'm telling you, it's like a 35-hour or so course, probably longer. I mean, I listen to things on 150% to 180% speed. So it might be longer than that, but this was an amazing, amazing story history. So I got one final question for you before we go. I know that you're into professional writing, that you study the brain science, okay, of written communication. I do notice that you've had a lot of high profile clients, including the UK Prime Minister's office at 10 Downing Street, and even the royal household at Buckingham Palace. What exactly did you do for them? Can you give us any details of how you work with the Prime Minister and the royal family?
Some details, yeah, not all of them. No, I'm joking. No, it's with those organizations. So the Prime Minister's office it's a department. It's like it's a standing department. It's permanent. The system we have over here is you have the civil service, and they're permanent, and then the politicians come and go. So we weren't working with the politicians.
It's kind of like that in the United States as well too. There's a permanent government that is the regular employees, and then you have the president that's elected, and the higher officials, some aides, stuff like that. Yes, they're elected. But the people that really do the day-to-day stuff, the daily grind, they're perma staff. So that's kind of the same thing that you're talking about.
Cool. Okay. They're kind of the unsung heroes, aren't they? Or often in the people that keep the lights on. But so with them and with Buckingham Palace, you've got, and again, we weren't working with the royal family themselves. We're working with the people who advise those people, and it's the same with the Prime Minister's office. You have to get information to the lawmakers, in that case, to the people who are making the big decisions, and those people are not experts, and so you need to be able to brief them and to bring them up to speed very quickly often on some very complex issues, effectively, so that they can hopefully, not always, but hopefully, make good decisions. And the same is true for the royal household too. And those are, yes, they're high profile clients, of course, but we've done the emphasis. So this is as opposed to my writing, but the emphasis that consultancy has worked. It's done similar things with tech giants in Silicon Valley, or even with the Kingdom of Bhutan, in the Himalayas. If people, wherever people find they have to communicate complex ideas clearly and effectively, then there is a need, or at least there's an opportunity for improvement. And really, thinking of, you mentioned biz dev. If you want to write a proposal, if you have to write a proposal, you're bidding for a huge contract. If you can do that more effectively, you gain, and even if you only gain a slight edge the horse that wins by a nose still wins, and it's about gaining that advantage in that instance. So yeah, 80,000 people, I think it is, over the last 24 years. That company has helped, and about 8,000 individual organizations, some very high profile, some less so. That was my honor and privilege to do that, and that company is still very much up and running. I chair it, but I'm no longer CEO, and now I'm focusing on the science of it. But there's a huge need for this, and it's a special area, as has become clear today. Really, I think this is not something that you can just kind of bluff your way through. It's there's a lot to it, but if you can pick it up, then you definitely do give yourself an edge.
So many people that watch a show. I mean, you're talking about business owners, young executives, and when I say young, I'm not necessarily saying age wise. They could be. I mean, if you look at our demographic, they're probably mostly under 45, at least on YouTube. But they mostly are young, career wise. They're younger executives. You have directors, people that really just want to grow personally, grow professionally, grow their businesses. They could be anywhere from a Fortune 500 company to a mom and pop shop to a sole one person shop, one person company where maybe they're an insurance agent and they just work for themselves or whatever. But I think a lot of people that watch this show, this was an important episode for them. I think the value that you've brought, a lot of education came on about how the human brain works, and really, I think the people that are watching and listening are going to get value out of understanding better how reading, writing, talking, speaking, how all that stuff kind of works in the brain, especially the written communication, because a lot of these people, again, they're trying to sell or they're trying to close deals, whether they're small or large deals. And you always struggle with the balance of how do I write things the proper way without having to write a whole book that confuses them? How do I trim this down, get it more precise, get it more accurate, and get, so I can get the deal closed? And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, it's and you mentioned, how do I write this in the proper way? I think that's where people often trip themselves up. They overwrite, they try to impress with their language rather than expressing with their language. And there's a lot you can do there to trim back what you're writing and increase your impact. So if I give you an example, so if you said, could you give me some assistance to make a decision? Okay, so you might think that sounds, that's quite wordy, but it sounds quite eloquent. Could you give me some assistance to make a decision? Well, if you take that word assistance, you could say assist, and then you'd have, could you assist me in making a decision? If you take decision, you could say decide. So then you could say, in fact, what you would say is not assist, but you'd probably be better off saying, could you help me decide? So if you go from could you assist, could you give me some assistance in making a decision, to could you help me decide, you've freed up a huge amount of brain space, because that first example I have had probably 2 or 3 times as many syllables, twice as many words. And what you're trying to do is impress people with your flowery language, whereas what you really want to be doing is communicating with them. And if you trim back that stuff, what you then do is give yourself more room to deliver on your expertise, to help the prospective clients, to impress them with your knowledge. They don't want to know that you've got a wide vocabulary. They want to know whether you can help them. So you need to communicate that as efficiently as possible. And I don't mean you strip everything back to bullet points. That's you definitely don't want to go there. You need to be telling some kind of story, and bullet points don't do that generally. You have to keep control or take control of the narrative. But this idea that there's you should be writing in a quote unquote correct way. And I don't mean that you kind of go completely off piste. It's just, don't think so much. People shouldn't think so much about trying to impress with with the way they're writing. They should be, writing in a fairly plain way, which usually means using shorter words. And there are so many cases where people do that, where they might say in spite of the fact that, whereas where they could just say despite, and then suddenly they've taken all these words out. And what you're doing is you're just tiring out the decision maker.
I've noticed, like, for example, Outlook has gotten some, I don't know if it's an add-on I put in on it or if it's just the built-in capability of it now. But as I'm writing work emails, if I have something like that example that you just said, okay, it will actually give you that little, I forget if it's a red little squiggly line. I think it's a blue one for grammar, red ones if it's misspelled. But it'll give you the blue squiggly line behind it, and you click like, what's wrong with that? And it'll suggest despite, like, hey, instead of this, just say despite. And it's like, okay, despite. But I'm actually in favor of that stuff because I do think, I like to talk. I have a podcast. I like written communication too, and trying to get things shorter and sweeter is something that I am constantly working on with myself. I do find the situation that sometimes I have a prospect or I have a customer that's been our customer too, where I actually got to over explain things because if I don't, I know them and they're going to come back and they're just going to keep asking questions if I try to make it short and sweet. So I try to avoid that by over explaining to them, hoping that they don't come back.
And it's really important to make that distinction. We're not talking about putting in less information. We're just talking about it as in the same way that, people think that writing clearly is always about removing all the jargon. If you've got words that you're sure your client will understand, especially if you've got words that your client is using all the time and it's kind of like an in language and you use that in language, then you don't want to change that. That would be mad. It can be a way to show an understanding. It's usually the words in between the jargon. So we're not talking about giving less information. We're just talking about writing these things in a much clearer way, and that's a very important difference. Distinction to make. You might end up with an email that's twice as long. I don't know. It depends what you're writing. But it's often seeing what you've written and thinking, what am I actually saying there? What am I actually trying to say? Walk away from it, come back. What am I actually trying to say? Get away from that screen that magnetic screen that's drawing you in, and become an extension of your brain, and just kind of think, okay, what do I need them to do? Where are they now? What are they interested in? Importantly, what do they want? Not just what do they need, but what do they want? How can I make them want what they need? All these kind of solid sales skills. But then go back to those rather than getting caught up and trapped in the weeds of, pardon the pun, trapped in the weeds of flowery language. Probably mixing metaphors there, but yeah.
No, that's been great. Hey, this has been amazing. I think I've learned so much. And again, I love using my family or me as an example because, it helps me grow. And that way, then there are real life examples that can help people in the audience grow as well, too. So, hey, thank you so much for coming on. I've got to ask, how can people reach out to you? Where can they find you? And you said about I believe you said that you had the book that you were working on, or published. Give us all the details.
It's so what I'm really trying to do is raise awareness of this topic because, as I've said all the way through, it's something that people take for granted, and it's not. There's much more to it than we think. So what I've done is I've created a free training course, and it is totally free. There's nothing promoted on there, and it's called Silent Influence. And it covers some of the stuff we've talked about today, but a lot more. There's, I could talk about this for forever. There's so much there, including things like, the effect of emotion on how we read things. And and whether we really read or how much we predict what was, why we don't see our biggest mistakes, that kind of thing. So if people just go to robashton.com, ASHTON, robashton.com/influence, then they can sign up for that course, and they will get they'll get lessons in their inbox and audio, so they can listen to it like a podcast too. That's the best way. And on that website, they can find out about the consulting I mentioned as well, just on my main website at robashton.com.
Okay. Hey, that is awesome. As everybody knows, we always have the links down below in the description of the video on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, it'll be the very first link you see after the blurb of what the episode's on. Hey, Rob, this was really, truly amazing. I went way longer than I ever thought that we would. But as you said, you could talk about this all day. Apparently, I can too. So thank you so much for coming on, man. This has been amazing. Thank you.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Cheers. Wow. That was such an incredible chat with Rob, wasn't it? I mean, that's just mind blowing. I mean, that play on puns because we were talking about the mind, but it really is fascinating. First, you all know the routine. If you found this interview helpful, if it sparked those warm and fuzzies, do me a favor, hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, or if you really want to help us out, give us a super thanks if you're watching on YouTube, or, you can also do us another favor by sharing this episode. That's how Shark Bite Biz grows. You've got to share us out to your friends, your family, your colleagues, anywhere that you dwell on the interwebs, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it is. I would love nothing more than Rob Ashton and Shark Bite Biz out there trending. Now let's get back to our rock star guest of Mr. Rob Ashton, okay? The mysteries of the mind. So very interesting. It's just one of those subjects that really makes you just kind of think about everything and maybe look at things in a little bit of a different perspective. The way that we talked about the brain scanning technology, for example, and like how you can see that certain of the areas of the brain are lighting up, having activity when you're doing certain certain activities at a, real-time level. That is pretty awesome. And like you said, it's not 100% precise, but it really kind of helps a lot of the neuroscientists out there to really just kind of see how your brain uses certain areas for different things like speech or writing or art or, walking or whatever it may be. And I really thought one of the more interesting things for me that I didn't really know too much about beforehand. I've probably heard this stuff before, but I've never had a full-blown discussion on it like I did right now with Rob, is that, if you're a young child and you have a traumatic brain injury and, another part of your brain should eventually be able to develop and take over those lost features or functions. Not all the time. And again, this is very limited instances, usually very young children where the brain is still fully developing, but still, that is amazing. I mean, if you think about it, if your brain is able to do that, and then you look at like what Elon's doing with his, the brain chip technology and that type of stuff, what is it, Neuralink or something like that? Our brains are extremely powerful. And I think it really comes down to people like Rob and other people, Elon even, that are really pushing, how can we make them better? How can we take full advantage of our minds? And, kind of think of it in terms of a computer, okay? With a computer, you overclock the processor, the graphics card, RAM, whatever it may be, to kind of get more juice out of it. I mean, our brains are pretty much like a computer in many ways itself. And I think ultimately where we're going is that we're going to unlock the power of the brain and be able to overclock, hopefully not underclock, but overclock our brains. And it just, again, just one of those fascinating discussions that really make you think about the mind, about writing, about reading, and about how everything just kind of flows together. It's like, it's there. you know that it does that. But when you take a step back and actually start thinking about it, I think that's where it makes a huge, huge difference. Awesome stuff, Rob. Your 6 years studying to the mind. I got to tell you, you've got some amazing results right now. And I cannot personally wait until your book does come out. Hopefully, we don't have to wait another 6 years. But when you get it out, please, I will be the first person to buy the book. Question of the day. Do you think that understanding the mind can help you write better? Please leave a comment down below on YouTube. Do you want to be on the show? Interviews at sharkbitebiz.com. Also, please don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, you could join the channel for $3 a month. You can become a baby shark. Don't forget, we have our deadhousecoffee.com. Use code SHARK. You'll get 20% off your order, and that helps support the work that we're doing here. Lastly, please don't forget, Wednesday, September 21st, 6 p.m., myself, Odetta Pine, we are going to be doing Shark Bite Biz Live, talking about all the top business and tech news items of the day. You all know this by now, but I'll tell you again anyways. I'm David Strausser. This is Shark Bite Biz, and we'll see you at the live stream Wednesday night or with our episode next Monday. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Shark Bite Biz. We hope you got some insightful info from this podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us through your favorite podcast app and visit us on the web at www.sharkbitebiz.com. How has business changed for you in the 20s? Email us at podcast@sharkbitebiz.com so you can join us and share your story.